Today we have a wonderful session. We have an amazing panel of experts, ministers, practitioners who will speak to us about the intersection of environment, of conservation, and of economic development, sustainable economic development. Moderating this session is Hilary Matson. She is an entrepreneur in her own right. I would like to invite you to the stage and take your seat, please, Hilary. And Hilary started a company called Yugen Earthside, and apparently it's a Japanese short for a really long paragraph that talks about the power of great feelings. You do that. She explained it, but it's a connection that you can't explain in words. You need paragraphs for it, but she will explain to us. But basically, her platform is about sustainable tourism. You need to have responsible, sustainable products and experiences to be on the platform. Virtually, we have Minister Dr. Edita Dapo. She is the Minister of Environment and Tourism of the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And the minister has, interestingly, a very appropriate portfolio to speak about today, which is really goes to the heart of the topic: conservation, environmental protection, and tourism at the same time. And she's leading that portfolio in the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. To my left here is the Honorable Minister Edmund Bartlett from Jamaica. Minister Bartlett is an entrepreneur, not just a policymaker. He is the co-chair of the Global Tourism Resilience and Crisis Management Center, and he's also co-chair of the Resilience Council. Minister Bartlett, would I invite you to stage, please? Thank you. And of course, also with us today is Dr.Taleb Rifai. He needs no introduction, but I will introduce him anyways. He is the co-chair of the Global Resilience Council. He, of course, most recently served as Secretary General of the United Nations World Tourism Organization for 2 terms, and before that, he was deputy for a period of time, and before that, he headed the Middle East region of the International Labour Organization, and before that, he was my boss as Minister of Tourism in Jordan. And I'd love to see you here. I'd love to see you everywhere. Please take your stage. We have 2 other speakers who are coming with us virtually. We have Beks Ndlovu. He's CEO of African Safari, and of course, safari means you need to protect the environment, you need to protect wildlife, and we're going to hear that perspective as well. And finally, Fabio Casilli, he is founder of Respire-Breathe. Well, we need a wonderful environment in order to breathe properly. But taking the session away is Hilary Matson, and Hilary's job is very simple: keep people on time, finish at 5 p.m., and have a wonderful session. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. He just made my job introducing the speakers super easy, so we can jump right into it. Again, my name is Hilary Matson, and I'm the founder of Yugen Earthside. Yugen, it's a Japanese word, and like a lot of Japanese words, it's a whole paragraph in English, so I'll say it very slowly. It means an awareness of the universe that triggers an emotional response that is too deep and powerful for words. And so I really love that, because when I travel, that's kind of how I feel, and I think that's why a lot of people do travel, is to kind of feel that awe. So anyways, that's a bit about the name of my company. So jumping into today, we've heard lots and lots of great discussion, and what I really want to focus on are actions from a governmental perspective, from a tour operator perspective. So that's what I will be trying to pull out of our wonderful speakers today. So we will start with Mr. Bartlett, Minister of Tourism of Jamaica. I know that island nations, they have a specific set of circumstances related to tourism. You cannot get to them unless you take a plane. They have to import many goods. Sometimes the resources can be a bit constrained, and things like all-inclusive resorts might use a lot of those for guests that might come at the detriment of locals. So there's many, many facets. So my first question for you is, as the Minister of Tourism, and also with your Parliament experience, how do you view the government's responsibility in managing the balance of these resources?
Thank you very much for that question, but just want to ask your permission for half a second, if you will, to just contextualize Jamaica in this whole space of environmental management and sustainability. Jamaica's coastal areas, which I'm going to indicate to you, generates about 80% of our GDP. Our mountains, rivers, forests, and wildlife are major attractions for domestic and global tourists. Beyond serving as part of the tourism market, biodiversity is a significant contributor to the attractiveness and quality of our product, and by extension, our competitiveness in the global tourism market. So Jamaica's terrestrial biodiversity is characterized by over 3,304 vascular plant species, approximately 600 species of ferns, 136 species of butterflies, and 106 known bird species that are endemic to the island. Jamaica's coastline is approximately 1,022 kilometers and includes an array of ecosystems including coral reefs, seagrass beds, mangrove forests, and wetlands. I gave you those numbers so you appreciate that for us, tourism is more than sand, sea, and sun. It's a whole ecosystem that has to be preserved, protected, and enhanced. So for us, the environment is the product. And so we develop varying legal and administrative as well as management systems to enable, first of all, knowledge about our ecosystem. So a lot of time and effort is spent on training and developing capacity within this area, how to take care of the environment. Secondly, to have the legal and regulatory mechanisms to enforce the compliance with the management processes that we have. And then to build the capacity to create products from it, to incentivize the development of products, sustainable products that enable the appropriate use of these resources. So in a nutshell, the entire tourism product of Jamaica is centered around our biodiversity and the rich heritage that we have in these areas, and the protection of the endemic species that are there, but most importantly of all, is to showcase them in a sustainable way to the world.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. If I can just go a little bit deeper, can you talk to us about how the difference of responsibility is balanced between the government and the individuals? Like, does the government regulate how much of certain resources resorts can use, or is some of the responsibility put on tourists to somehow contribute or compensate in some way?
I think we were talking earlier about avoiding a certain word.
Yes, I asked him what he thought about a tourist tax.
A T word. Yes, a T word called tax, because tourism issue taxes. We don't talk about tax because as part of the cost of bringing visitors, and we want to reduce or eliminate costs, but to ensure that the consumption levels of tourists is at the highest possible, because they must leave back all the dollars in the destination. So, but to make the point, yes, through government managed and funded entities such as the National Conservation Corporation and the National Environmental Planning Agency, which we call NEPA, and we have an entire ministry that is responsible for global climate change and environmental management. So we create, first of all, a whole system of approvals for any development in tourism. So if you are to build a hotel, for example, you have to go through that rigorous process of satisfying us that not only are you going to be in consonance with that wider ecosystem, but that if you have to remove any, you replace it. And that also you have a full system of management to ensure that the ecosystems around are preserved and protected. Secondly, we have a system of surveillance, so as to ensure that what you say you're going to do, you actually do. And if you don't, then there are consequences, which has to do with the licensing that you operate with or monetary fees that you may have to pay. We don't have a system of taxation on the visitor who comes in directly, but we do have something called a Tourism Enhancement Fund. And so that's a soft way of saying to the visitor, contribute to us, and we do that on their tickets before they come. And it goes primarily for those things, to ensure that our coastal water systems are protected, that the E. coli levels and other such levels in your water is the lowest possible, that there also are sufficient management of our wetlands, and also that the use, for example, of our coastal water areas, which is a big part of the product, is done in a manner which protects the coral system and also protects the ability to have our seaweeds and those key elements that are vital to the preservation of the quality of our coastal water systems to be preserved and maintained.
Wonderful, thank you. As a traveler, I consider it a privilege, which hopefully most of you do as well, because it is one. And if there is an easy way for me to contribute to a fund that will help the preservation, I would gladly do it, because I don't want to be leaving a bad impact. So do you think that all governments or most governments should be doing this? Are there some blockers to making this practice more widely standardized?
Well, governments make fiscal arrangements in relation to their own abilities and capacities. I'm not to offer any straight guidance in terms of what you do, but I would definitely urge that some arrangement is made for the development and preservation of your biodiversity and the important element, especially if you are a destination that is driven by the 3 S's, sand, sea, and sun. So we would suggest that that would be a preferred route to take. I don't like the idea of taxes, as I said before. And I'm not the one to say so because I'm government, right? But the effort is to ensure that the management of our resources is at a level always where it is resourced. And if the governments are unable to do so because their resource does not permit it, then certainly I think that our visitors could make a contribution.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. So I am going to move on to Dr. Rifai. I'm so pleased you're here because you have such a wealth of experience, roughly 20 years more than me. So because you've been in the industry for so long, I think you have a great perspective on how the industry's response to environmental challenges has been. So can you talk a bit about the changes that you've seen, positive or negative, in your career with regards to tourism's impact on the environment?
Yes. I want to start where Minister Bartlett ended. He started by proving that Jamaica is not just sun and sea. Mr. Bartlett started by saying that Jamaica is not sun and sea only. I say it's not just the environment. Jamaica is made of Jamaicans. That's the most important part.
Yeah.
Because any country in the world can say, I have the most beautiful gardens, I have the most beautiful trees, the most beautiful beaches. But nobody can say that they have the Jamaican people except the people of Jamaica. So that's important for me.
Yeah.
I think separating the environment from the people is not a very good idea. Not a very good idea at all. So that's what I want to emphasize, number one. Number two is, if you want to start taxing people for coming to these places, people would stop coming. Only people that can pay can go. That's discriminatory, I think. Because travel, as I said, is a human right. Everybody has the right to be there. So Minister Bartlett is adopting the right strategy by not taxing these people. The important thing is how to benefit the local community directly. That's most important than anything else.
Yeah. If you guys have been attending the earlier sessions, he's made some of these similar points that tourism or sustainability is not just about the environment, but also the economy and the societies and cultures that we're visiting, which is 100% true, and they very much go hand in hand. So but they are interlinked, you know, like you want to support the economy, so you want to bring people and make it easy, as you said, but then there are the resources to consider, and tourism does take a lot of those. So how have you seen, do you think tourism's impact on the environment has gotten better or worse? Do you think there's more responsibility or less responsibility for the industry now?
There is more responsibility, for sure. It was not like this before.
And who do you think has the brunt of the responsibility to make real substantial change?
The government.
Governments.
Destinations. They have to manage it the right way, not the visitor. The visitor cannot be treated in a special way or a different way. The walls must be lowered between the local community and the visiting community.
So I totally agree. So if we like drill into that a little bit with the governments, if we steer away from the idea of a tax, the dirty T word that we won't mention again, what is the best way for the government to preserve, like an actual, you know, concrete action? What do they need to do to preserve the biodiversity and welcome people?
Empower the local community. Empower the local community. The revenues of tourism must go to the local community directly. We talked about all-inclusive model. All-inclusive model does not permit any money to go to the local community.
Any inclusive model should definitely involve the local community.
Definitely.
But what about like forest preservation, endemic species? How are the local communities connected to protecting the land?
They would protect their own interest, because if they feel that tourism is bringing them direct economic benefits, they would protect the environment for the sake of preserving that thing. Mm-hmm. The best protectors of any environment are the people that live in that environment, not the tourists, but the people that live there.
Okay, so then what actions do travelers need to take, or the government, or the local communities? Who needs to do what in order to make what you're saying happen?
Responsibility is that of government, number one, because the government can regulate anything.
But do you have a recommendation of what governments should do?
Yes. I think governments should not allow for all-inclusive models that do not benefit the community directly.
Sorry, one more time.
They should not allow for that.
Not allow all-inclusive models?
Yes, unless we feed into the community things.
Okay.
Because otherwise, the people would resent the tourism. If people resent the tourism, then there is no preservation at all.
Yeah.
Preservation is in the hands of the own people. That's what I believe in.
Okay, so no all-inclusive resorts. Do you have another idea to add to this?
Yes. I think the government should regulate the flow of tourists into an area.
I completely agree.
So that the people that go to these areas are people that understand the benefits of the community around. Mm-hmm. These are the people that should be welcome.
I absolutely love this idea of somehow gatekeeping the flow, and it's very complicated because, as Dr. Rifai has already mentioned, it is a human right and privilege and luxury, all of the above, to travel. So without discriminating, how do you choose travelers? How do you gatekeep? Do you provide incentives for people to come during the off-season? Do you limit the number of tourists? Do you cap it? Because without doing a tax, how do you change human behavior?
Okay. The best thing is to promote off-season.
Promote off-season?
Yes. You have to pay money to promote the off-season. As I said, for example, the example of Opatia in Croatia. Mm-hmm. I said that in the previous. It's important to promote visiting places in off-season time, and visiting places that are not visited by people. That's important, and that's in the hands of governments. Okay. Governments can do that if they promote it the right way.
Yeah, no, very, very good ideas.
Jamaica's doing that. I've been to Jamaica many times.
Yeah.
I think it's a very good example of how to do that.
Would you like to add a government perspective on either of his two ideas?
But I think that Dr. Rifai's perspective on it is very interesting, particularly when one considers the different type of business models that are being utilized in tourism today. The all-inclusive model, for example, is one that has wider benefits than meets the eye. For countries, for example, that have a higher rate of security risk, all-inclusives is a godsend. It changes the game so much. But it also does something else, because if the supply chain in your country is properly developed and all of the requirements of tourism are sourced locally, then all-inclusive model is great. Because what it really does, in fact, is to prepay for your experiences before you arrive. And it offers a cash flow benefit to the proprietors as well. But it doesn't change the fact that you're able to experience all of the rich and diverse, products that are in the community. You utilize local transportation probably a little more because you have to move from one attraction to another. And what has happened is that the model really has evolved into really an accommodation situation where it's the rooms. The rest of it is really experiences that are bought from local people by and large. Because you don't come to a location just to sleep and to stay in the rooms. You come to appreciate the culture, the richness and diversity of the culture. And those cultures are not in the four walls. They're outside. And so I think it's a business model that you may utilize depending on how you want to drive your own financial arrangements. But what I think the big issue is that our tourism must ensure that the local, ordinary person in the community is a beneficiary.
Yes.
And that's the big question because, 80% of tourism is driven by small and medium enterprises across the world. But only 20% of the returns from tourism go to that group. That's an asymmetry that we have to rebalance. And this is a big part of what the mission, perhaps the reimagining of tourism post-COVID, should really look at. How do we create that equity and that balance to ensure that the real beneficiaries go to the people of the community rather than the big tour operators, and I'm not calling any names here, but you know them. And they come in and give to the little guy who is the author and the provider of the experience, the crumbs that fall from the table.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you. All right. I have a question for Beks. Maybe just pin in it. One quick question. Beks, I wanted to jump to you because we've been talking about the responsibility that government has, but you, as a CEO of African bush camps, you have kind of taken some things into your own hands in terms of the responsibility or the contribution that companies, that tour operators can have. So for those of you guys that don't know, Beks has a very innovative model with his safari experiences where his company actually helps with the selection process of the travelers.
Where is he based?
Beks, where are you based?
I'm based in South Africa.
South Africa.
Properties, Bosnia and
So they help select the travelers, and then you also donate a percentage of your sales to local community projects. And so I really love this, and can you tell us a bit more about why you have this model and what kind of inspired that?
Thank you. Background. Before the African bush camps 15 years ago, we just celebrated our 8th year. But prior to that, I did leading safaris in Africa. And it was the experiences of seeing different parts of Africa that made me realize that actually, as an industry and as a continent, we have big challenges ahead of us that we need to pay attention to that are around uplifting communities, impoverishment on the outskirts of these very fragile ecosystems. And in the back of understanding that we as human beings, whether it's through tourism or population explosion, particularly along the east coast of the continent, we are going to be in some serious trouble. And so a profession of me being as a guide, I could only really effect maybe guiding a group of 6 to 8 people at once. And I would be the person having the impact, being able to tell our story and getting some of our guests to come along and contribute to a better Africa. But my inspiration was I need to do more towards this dire situation. And the only way I could think of doing that was starting my own property and duplicating myself in terms of employing more guides, working with local communities on the outskirts of these areas, and creating a movement through our staff internally, and then growing that outwards in terms of being able to involve the communities around us. And so 15 years ago, we set off. So from me being employee number one and the only one to having at least the first 16 to 20 people. 15 years later, I'm managing 15 properties. We've actually just launched our 16th property this year in Botswana in March, April. But we now operate in 3 countries and have close to 600 advocates who are all very passionate about contributing to the local communities from where they come from, and of course also to the environment. So it was really an inspiration of how can one scale themselves and create a whole movement so that the impact is a lot wider and the impact is actually done by many. We have this African proverb that we've adopted, which is that if you want to go fast, go it alone, which is what I did for 10 years. But if you want to go far, take others along with you. And that's the spirit with which we've grown the business to where it is today, and the impact to our local communities with whom we see as very strong partners in order to address the environmental challenges and the impoverishment in these communities.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. So if you could give some advice to other tour operators, no matter where they're based, what would you say in terms of inspiring them to consider a similar model?
We've come quite a long way, Hilary, I think, as an industry in embracing the fact that we need to work with local communities and we need to share the tourism dollar. And I think it's safe to say that pre-COVID, a lot of our competitors, other products, tour operators, most of whom have got their own sets of foundations or not-for-profit side of the business. And I think considering how much work we've done in the past, we now have to look at post-COVID and ask ourselves the fundamental question, which a lot of us have been agonizing over, which is, are we going to be prepared for the next calamity? We've seen Ebola, we've seen financial crisis, and right now we've experienced COVID, which has really set us back in terms of our efforts and progress where we were with activities with our local communities and conservation efforts. And so really the big push for us now going forward is to all come to a place where we acknowledge that our challenges environmentally and from a conservation point of view, from a community upliftment point of view, are actually the same challenges that we all share, whether you're in Jamaica or you're in Australia or you're in some parts of Africa. And we feel that we need to now build some resilience for us to actually anticipate the next calamity, because it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And a whole bunch of us have started these discussions around a concept or a movement called African Changemakers, which is really calling on the broader world out there to say, we're inviting you to co-invest with us, not by taxing or levying the client who's coming over to Africa, who, by the way, we hope to be our long-term partners in the environment. But let's co-invest more from our businesses where we match this co-investment and we begin to build what we're calling a war chest that will help us build resilience so that we can long-term be very strategic in attending to some of our challenges in our communities from a conservation point of view. And so really it's a call for action. So in terms of your question, this is really an invitation, I think, to anyone that owns inventory to say, let's co-invest, because Africa needs more revenue and it needs more resources to tackle its challenges.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing all that. And the African Changemakers program sounds fantastic. So maybe something that other companies can be a part of as well. We're going to keep moving along, and I'm going to jump to Dr. Dapo, the Minister of Tourism and Environment for Bosnia and Herzegovina. She can respond by voice, but we can't see her camera, so please bear with us for that. So we've already heard a bit about Bosnia and Herzegovina this morning. We have several members here. And in terms of rebuilding Bosnia and Herzegovina as a sustainable destination, do you feel like you're kind of starting from square one? And what are you doing to lay that out from the beginning in terms of attracting tourists to your country in a responsible way from the get-go?
Good afternoon from Bosnia and Herzegovina, country that has the shape of the heart and lies in the heart of southern East Europe. Good evening from Sarajevo, the city that is called Jerusalem of Europe, because it is the place where in the center of the city you can find the mosque, churches, cathedrals, synagogues and everything. And that is due to the fact that we were on a crossroad of the East, between East and the West for the century, and we are very much proud of that historical heritage. But beside the historical heritage, we have a great diversity of a landscape and the most breathtaking natural sites in Europe. Of course, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in the pre-COVID era or years before the COVID, we had a tremendous increase of a number of tourists. And that was because we were newly discovered destination for the Gulf countries and the Far East countries. That increase of a number of tourists had a great positive economic and social impact on the communities. And the many foreign investors as well as the domestic investors started investing in the hospitality business. But however, like many other countries, we were facing I would say unbalanced tourism or places were overcrowded. Here in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we have several national parks and the parks of nature, and the number of tourists that were visiting those places were really large. So, as Mr. Taleb said, that was a signal for us that we should think about the limiting of a number of tourists in a certain protected area. We as a federal government, we are of course bringing laws and regulations, defining the standards for the tourism facilities, access to biodiversity resources, land use, regulation, zoning, etc. We are helping local communities, especially around natural parks, how to develop, because development of the area results in constructions that's not just hotels and attractions, but building roads, parking lots, improvement in electrical water or the sewage system, which brings the benefit to the local community with increasing their standards of living, but it might have a negative impact on a biodiversity and ecological habitats. Besides that, we are setting standards for health and the safety of tourists that are coming to Bosnia and Herzegovina. So in terms of food that they eat, or now during the COVID era, the health safety, in order that the tourist can regain the confidence into the industry and into the country and come again here. We are, of course, establishing and maintaining the protected area, but we are bringing laws and regulations, but I have to say that the public companies that are managing those areas are really, and the communities in this area are real preservers of this. And of course, through the allocation of the tax resources, we are financing various projects to protect the biodiversity. Of course, when we are talking about natural sites, natural park or parks of nature, we have to think of a negative way the tourist affects those sites. They come to see it, but sometimes they leave waste disposal, they're touching or scaring animals and similar things. So the companies that are managing those areas are usually providing information. I wouldn't say educating the tourists, but they're providing information to the tourists, what they can find there in order to behave or not to destroy the flora and fauna that we are trying to preserve.
Thank you so much for all of that wonderful information. I know there's so much to say, and it was daunting setting out trying to do this in 45 minutes. So we're going to go to Mr. Casilli. Thank you so much for your patience. So Mr. Casilli is the founder of a French company called Respire, which means breathe in French. Bonjour. So your organization describes itself. Hello. Your organization describes itself as a think tank working horizontally across many stakeholders to improve the tourism industry for tomorrow. So in our last few minutes, can you please tell us about some of the most concrete actions and change that your company has driven?
Yes. First of all, I would like to tell you that I'm really honored and proud to be invited here to talk about it. Our association is a realization that motivated many tourism actors, professionals, that we had actually the need to change absolutely our way of traveling. If you want to be actors, to change the situation, to be more conscient, it's now that we have to do it. In this moment, we are more in coaching and awareness rising than in action. We try in every way to inform and make tourism stakeholders understand that we have to change our way of traveling. All the way of tourism must be over and now, and it must be over now, or it will be over forever.
Thank you for that. So in terms of environmental initiatives, do you have something that you would like to share with us that Respire has done, or that you have inspired other groups or companies or people to do?
Yeah, we have many groups of common intelligence, and we are trying to imagine how we have to do tourism in the future, how, in which way our industry have to be changed.
Okay, thank you for that. Can I ask one more question? Am I allowed?
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to Beks, actually, because I was hoping to end on a positive, inspiring note, and I was hoping you could tell us about an environmental project that your company has donated to and what positive change that has made.
Thank you for that, Hilary. We have one of our biggest issues in the places that we operate is this thing that we refer to as human-wildlife coexistence. We try to promote the existence of communities in harmony with nature without the conflict. And it's the only way in which local communities will not resent the environment and the wildlife. And it's a way in which we can together demonstrate the value of tourism as an enabler to the growth of these communities. And one of these projects that we have is a project called the Boma Project. Now, Boma in South African, in Afrikaans is essentially a barrier, or at least a space where people gather and have meetings and discuss. It's normally made out of big logs. And typically, like in Botswana, it's called the Kotla, South Africa is called the Boma, but it's the area in which your cattle or your livestock is housed. And usually this is quite rudimentary in the communities, to the extent that when lions come into the community, or hyenas, they're able to see the cattle and attack the cattle. And this is where the conflict goes, because cattle, any form of livestock, is a form of wealth for our local communities. And so this is a constant source of irritation for communities, to the extent that lions are killed, hyenas are also killed, whether it's poisoning or arrow, or they're hunted with dogs. And so in order to harmonize the situation, we came up with a concept which actually was not our new concept, but it's a concept also that I practice in East Africa, where we provide, made out of a fabric, a PVC fabric, a solid sort of sheeting where the communities can actually keep their cattle and be protected from livestock. And in some cases, what happens is that home or village to village, they all commune and bring their livestock under one roof, and they keep these things moving, these bomas, from one person's field to the next family's field to the next family's field. And what's happening is that you're not only offering protection for their livestock, but as you move it from field to field, you're having those fields actually get nourished again in terms of the productivity of the soil because of the droppings from the cattle. And in so doing, what we've seen is that our communities no longer have to clear vast spaces and forests in order to try and grow more food to feed their families. their productivity and their yield just in those spaces is now tenfold. So in fact, they now are very keen to start planting trees in some of the areas that they'd cleared previously. But through that, we're able to introduce a health program for their livestock. And so there's really intrinsic benefit all around where they realize that actually there are other ways to be able to coexist with wildlife. And that's been probably one of the most successful projects that we're doing in a few areas.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. So I think we need to be wrapping up. I wish I could spend 45 minutes with each of our speakers, but we've heard some wonderful ideas about promoting tourism in the off-season, about attracting visitors, but also figuring out a way to limit them without discriminating. So thank you guys very much for your feedback. And would you like to add any last words?
I have a little story to share with you.
A story, okay.
If you don't mind.
I let them decide.
I was in the island of the Philippines once, 3 years ago. I was taken by the lady minister there to an island next to Manila. The island was owned by some person, investor, had to buy the entire island to control his investment. What they didn't tell me at the time, when we landed there, is that there were 90,000 people living on that island. So when I asked about them, the investor said, don't worry about them. They're like my children. I take very good care of them. I know my corporate social responsibility. All the employees here are from that island, from those communities. I asked to go visit that place. When I went there, I came back. And I told him, look, you've done a great job, but, he said, oh, there's a but. I said, there's a big but. The but is that I'm not sure that the children and the grandchildren of the people that are living there will be happy to spend the rest of their lives coming to work in your all-inclusive resort, then go back to your families every night to see the difference in the standards of living. You can't spend your time servicing the rich people of the world. So he said, what should I do? I said, you should encourage your people to go visit this community. He said, what are they going to see there? I said, don't worry, just let them go there. I did that in Botswana. In Botswana, there was, I met the president there. He told me he had a problem with the national park there. This problem is that there are villages around the national park that he created to preserve the animals there. When I went there to see it, I found out that they have barbed wire the place so that the animals would not go away. The people that are living there were used to go in and out of this place very freely. Now they cannot move in. So I advised them to encourage people in that resort to go visit those villages. 2 years ago, when I finished, I was entering the park. I looked at my left, the sun was setting on my right. I looked at my left hand, and there was 2 people playing billiard with 2 tourists on a big, heavy table that sunk in the ground because it was muddy. I said, it worked. And it worked because people are going from that resort to visit these communities. When they go there, they create jobs. Corporate social responsibility today is not just about paying money. It's about sharing your business. You have to accept the fact that your business must be shared with the community. If you don't accept that, it will not work. The people of the community will resent you. And if they resent you, it will not work anymore. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Well, very briefly, the positive story from us is how to convert what seemed to be a problem into an opportunity. And for us, most of our fisher folks lack the capacity for deep sea fishing. And as a result, they tend to harvest in the shoreline areas and destroy the fingerlings. We had to develop a whole new program of conservation and the building of different, reserves for the growing of our fish. And so what we did was to employ those fisher folks to be divers and also to go out into the sea with cameras to take pictures of the larger fish that are there and to look at what is happening to coral reefs and so on. So in the process, they went out, started to earn a little better than they did with fingerlings. A few months after that, we start to have nice, well-grown fish in our reserve areas. And suddenly they realize, oh my God, this is what I must do. If I preserve and conserve and protect, I can then benefit later on down the road with better catch and more resources. So I think that this is a way of how we can manage the collaboration between our local people and our energy and, our environmental protection and management programs. I thought that I would leave that with you because this is something that could be practiced, particularly in small island states where fisher folks rely heavily on catch for their living but lack the capacity for deep sea fishing.
Thank you so much. And I think with that, we need to be wrapping up for the next panel to start. So thank you to all of our virtual speakers. Thank you to everybody who's watching this virtually. And yes, thanks.